Alright, let's go ahead and get started for today. Hey, how are you doing? So, today obviously we're going to do some stuff talking about charisma, but I do need to do just a few housekeeping items first, so bear with me. Uh, I am. Oh, this is the background music. Okay. This is, if you're wondering, this is from. I use a web app called Tabletop Audio usually to do the background. The guy behind Tabletop Audio, talked to him a few times. Nice guy. This particular track is called Moon Monsoon Temple, and I listened to this for multiple hours on Sunday because it was the felt like the best tracking for our meeting in and around the Shogunate in old Jacklantis, or at least that's what we're calling it in our games. Our DM has made a Trident Society based on Shogunate Japan, and they're underwater, so we just call it Jacklantis. Uh, and so there was a big shogun meeting with the other daimyo. Very tense. I think I've mentioned this before. That's a very political game. There's a lot of political stuff that's going on in that game. So we're a diplomatic envoy, among other things, that are being sent, as well as doing adventuring. Sent there trying to make allies out of the Tritons, out of old Jacklantis. Uh, so I listened to this, so now this track is probably always going to make me think about that. Those tense negotiations, and all the formality. There's so much ritual that was involved with that. It's very much when you see sort of like those wide shots of anything that deals with generally an emperor. So if you look at something that's like the Marco Polo show or any sort of Chinese or Korean historical dramas, there's usually the scenes with the emperors and everybody down on their knees and kowtowing. It was a lot of that, and bringing gifts for the emperor and answering their questions of being introduced. There's a lot of formality that goes into it, a lot of pomp and propriety. So now this track will probably always make me think of that, or at least for a while it will. Like I said, I need to do a few housekeeping items. We can talk a little bit more about games that I played. So obviously that was my Sunday game. That's the game that I play in, and then we have a game in which I run. What am I looking for? Oh, you know what I need? I need this. There we go. So I have a game that I run as well, and we ran yesterday. And things went well. I'm gonna say that. This is a yeah. Okay. So things went well. Things took a hard left turn. Let's put it that way. Things took a hard left turn at about the two-thirds mark of the way through the session, in which the players are apparently trying to get themselves arrested. Players going to be players, I guess. They have the showdown with Charles Rogel, who's hot on their heels as a mercenary detective, which is all confusing. A lot of stuff you don't need to know. Anyways, he's a mercenary guard who's acting as police in the city. Kind of like Flaming Fist kind of style, if you're familiar with that aspect from Forgotten Realms. So they're kind of like the Flaming Fist, or that's the function they're being used right now. They're a little bit different than the Flaming Fist, but for right now, they're being like a privatized police force to help out because there's too many people in the town. And this one guy, we had a character that committed a crime. It went a little sideways during the crime, and they're a little bit on the run. But they've got somebody who's chasing them down who doesn't really know who the perpetrators are, and is slowly piecing it together. Got all the PCs in the room, and basically asked them questions and just kind of like sat there and waited for them to answer questions in which they slowly began to just implicate themselves, which was very funny. Just watching them implicate themselves in each other and, very quickly. There's a lot of shenanigans going on. We got somebody in a disguised self pretending to be a witness at the crime, which the investigators already met. The investigator, again, is just like a dude. He's like got guard stats, so he's not particularly good at any of this. But he's just kind of been listening and waiting for the characters to just kind of trip over themselves, which has come uh, fast and plentiful. Fast and plentiful. So it shouldn't be an issue. But right now they are stuck in uh, in a temple. Hold on, let me write this out real quick, and then I'll finish that story. Yeah, it's fine. Doesn't need to be anything particularly special. Just letting people know that we're gonna be online. I got one more, and then we'll finish this. Finish another talk. I think this is it. Yes. Okay. Good. Just need to do that. Bada bing. Bada boom. All right. There we go. All right. Now I can get back to paying attention. So the story. So right now they are locked in a Temple of the Leviathan, uh, locked up with Charles Rogan. Rogel had him in the back room asking him these questions, and had sent off his other guard companion, his partner, off to go do something. A person comes in. Our player, who's the perpetrator, comes in disguised as one of the witnesses from the scene of the crime, and they have a little tete-a-tete, have a little discussion back and forth. This is when our detective starts to figure out some weird things. The pieces of information between the PCs aren't lining up, and that is when his partner comes back with about a dozen other guards. Because they're lying in wait. They think that this perpetrator PC is supposed to meet the rest of the party, so they're lying in wait for this person to show up here so they can arrest them and take them into custody. Not knowing that that person's already inside. Had them roll just kind of a luck check to see if they were going to show up before the guards showed up. And they showed up. So they showed up, and now we've got about 30 minutes left on the disguise self. Doesn't have any more slots, spell slots for doing it. So basically, they're stuck in the Temple of the Leviathan. They're under heavy guard with about a dozen guards, and they've got half an hour before the disguise wears off to figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to get out of the situation. So that's the cliffhanger we ended it off. Otherwise, it was downtime. I know some of our players get a little bit frustrated because we had 3 days of downtime leading up to this festival, and we're now only through the second day of downtime. We've had taken an entire session to do the first day of downtime, an entire session to do the second day of downtime, which is frustrating. I think some of the players because they really want to see the festival because we've been teasing the festival for a while. I guess it's the beginning of the campaign that this festival is upcoming, and there's going to be cool stuff to do at this festival. So obviously players when you get there do, but man, sometimes they take a hard left. The funny thing is that I think the player who most wants to see the festival, kind of pushing things forward towards the festival, is the person who helped take this entire session in a vast left turn and tangent and make this take longer. No shade, I think it's funny, and everybody's having a good time, so it's not a big deal. But it is funny that kind of caused this situation. Let me do this. But yeah, that's it. Tomorrow we're playing more game. Supposed to. We're on the player, so we'll see. Uh, Anything else interesting happened in our game yesterday? They learned out a lot of it. They got a lot of nice world building stuff and learned about some more stuff that's kind of going on, and more stuff leading up to the festival. Though we've got some of the big key contenders there. We now know what the stones look like, and one of our PCs was able to, with a nice athletics check, was able to secure one of the stones as they were sort of tossed out in the crowd, which are sort of these token currency that will be important for the festival. Was able to secure one of those. Um, our shady character, the one who is now in the Temple of Leviathan, disguised as somebody else. Uh, got potentially a new job to be a fence at the upcoming festival, so potential there. They are going to get a babysitter that didn't roll high enough to get away from having a babysitter. Uh, kind of look over their shoulder, make sure that they're doing things they're supposed to, because these people are about to put a lot of valuable merchandise in the species' hands, and they don't know anything really about the species. They kind of got a lukewarm vetting from two NPCs that the character had previously done a job with, but those two NPCs got caught. That's the same job in which they're now looking for this PC. Um, so we'll see what happens. There's a lot of question marks from I think everybody's side, but especially me as a DM, because I'm like I don't know what's going to happen. Uh, the thing is like the guy who's playing the detective, a character that we was named by this person who's in trouble, Charles Rogel, uh, is a Bloody Heather mercenary. He's only got like guard stats, so he doesn't have particularly, like I said, he doesn't have particularly good investigative stats or anything like that. Thing is that the only thing that we know about Charles Rogel, we know a few things. Number one, he can't read, which is funny because he pretends to be making notes all the time as he's doing these investigations and these interviews. So we know he can't read. We know that he has a bit of an infatuation with Pearl, who is the local high talent courtesan, and is jealous because the group was staying with her. And we do know that he is extremely dogged in his commitment to quote unquote justice. Uh, so it's really just shining through that he's going to be like a dog or a snapping turtle that's bit and just not going to let go. He's going to hold on till he gets to the bottom of it. Uh, really should be easy to get around him, but some some bad rolls and the players continuing to put their foots in their own mouths has allowed him to continue around. But yeah, that's all the fun D&D stuff. Stefan, anything particularly fun happened in the game that I was playing? Oh, we threw a guy off the balcony. That's always fun. Threw a guy off the balcony, uh, who then exploded. In a large explosion, a larger explosion than I think we were all anticipating, in which we we all would have probably gone down, gotten KO'd for sure, along with probably other people in that room, which may or may not include the Emperor. So wanted to avoid that. Get that out of the way. Anything else interesting kind of coming out of the session? Um, Tracking down the Pale Lady. Still a bunch of questions around that. Starting to see the tendrils of our different player character backgrounds start to come together. Or we have potentially a ladder connection that deals with one of our characters. We have potentially a Giants connection, which deals with my person's character, and we have potentially a Raven Queen or Pale Lady connection, uh, which has something to do with our other characters. We only have 3 PCs in this campaign, so it's interesting to see the DM starting to work those all together. He does a really good job with that. And I'm happy in the campaign overall. Especially, I'm getting a lot more play with this character's backstory than I did with the last. It might have been a little overwhelming. I did write out, I think, like 2 pages of backstory. It was really only long because I wrote it in sort of like a first person format, as if it was like him, that PC, recalling the events, whereas this one was much, much shorter. And since I didn't get a lot of play with the background in the last campaign, this one I wanted to keep it very. So there were a lot more pieces to sort of discover and make decisions kind of along the way as we were playing. Or I had ideas, but I just didn't put them like pen to paper and give them to the DM. So I don't know if it's felt like it was more flexible, or I think it was just the tone, the focus between the campaigns that was really the difference. And I didn't feel bad that my character in the previous campaign didn't get a lot of their backstory highlighted, because nobody's really did, except for one character. One character's kind of got pretty heavily featured. just because it got sort of tied into what one of the sort of primary antagonists at the end of the campaign was. But yeah, so I don't feel bad about it, but I am enjoying seeing more of this character's backstory came out, which I think this character's backstory has more legs on it, anyways. Uh, the previous characters was very cut and dry. A very specific thing happened in his backstory that would have come up and didn't end up coming up really in the campaign. And this character's backstory event, like singular event, does come up a lot. Well, the implications of it come up a lot. It's something that's very, very much in the forefront of this character's mind all the time. He has his own sort of like quest he is focused on accomplishing. But let's go ahead and get into it. So today we said we were going to talk about. So we're going to talk about removing charisma from D&D. Now let's just cut things a little bit off the pass. Do I think that it's bad that charisma's in D&D? Not really. Do I think that D&D could survive without charisma? Yeah, probably. Uh, I think there are a lot of stats that could be jumbled around. I think that you could make a case for removing intelligence as a stat. I think you could make a much easier case for probably even more than charisma is removing constitution as a stat from D&D. Because constitution, in general, yeah, I'd say that charisma is probably the second easiest to remove. And leaving constitution is probably the easiest to remove. Because constitution really only comes up in the form of saving throws, since there's no proficiencies attached to it. It really only comes up in saving throws. And especially we can look down here when we're looking at it. There's not really any pillar stuff that's tied around it, and pretty much the only thing the Constitution comes up the most in is things like poisons, and other similar things of that nature. So, not too much from the pillar aspect. We don't make a lot of Constitution checks in general. Usually, that's some sort of like an endurance thing, which I think you could argue to be something like strength. And there's no proficiencies or skills attached to it. There's no class that uses a primary ability. The closest is something like the barbarian who gets to add Constitution to their AC. And I think there's other ways to get around that too. In the same way of natural armor that monsters have and other things that would be to do. There's no spell casting tied to it. So again, it's pretty. I think Constitution is probably the easiest one to get rid of, and using it. There are other there are other game systems that use Constitution as sort of a derivative stat, meaning that it's usually some sort of mixture, some sort of body stat that's usually a mixture of something like strength and dexterity. And so you use those two primary ability scores to kind of figure out what that Constitution score would be. Rather than having it be a primary aspect of the game, it's sort of this thing that's really only helpful for determining like hit points and doing stuff like that. But today we're going to focus on charisma, which I think is probably the second easiest to remove from the game. So let's go ahead and jump into it, since we've got enough preamble. So I've got a little setup here. You know, what's our goal? We're going to look a little bit at the book as well. Look at some things because we want to look at the book and how it's actually laid out in the book. So maybe we can get an idea of the designers for specifically 2024 D&D's intent on charisma as an ability score and how it's supposed to be used and all the sort of things that are attached to it. So we can kind of look through those. So, what is our goal? I think our immediate goal is obviously we're going to remove charisma. We're going to try to any let's say function of charisma. Okay. So that's kind of our goal. That's what we kind of want to do. And we have some things down at the bottom where we talk about the how we're going to do that, and maybe there may be some things that I missed. We'll see that if I go through, but I think I got everything as to where the charisma kind of touches stuff. So we're going to remove any function of charisma of the game. So that's the goal, and I think that that's an easy thing to do because charisma is often. Well, the way that I want to say this is that D&D has a history. So we've got 50 years of D&D behind us, and we still come into questions about specifically things like charisma, constitution, intelligence, about why are these ability scores in the game? Where does this ability score stop leading into other ability scores? And does it make sense for sometimes it's hard that the definition of the stat itself, the ability score, is amorphous. You get that with intelligence very often, where somebody's like, where does intelligence stop and wisdom begin? And I think the easiest way to point at that, at least in 5-year 2024, is looking at investigation checks versus perception checks, and like when is which one called for, and if you have a character that's spelled for investigation, does that mean that they're not perceptive often? Or if you have a character that's got a really high perception but isn't really good at investigating things, which also feels kind of weird. So it's murky. The definitions are murky. There's not a clear line of delineation between one side or the other. And I think we've run into that same thing with charisma. Run into this idea which we're right now we're getting straight into kind of why change the game. Like what's our goal? And so we're trying to remove this charisma. So one of our goals is to, I think, make social encounters interesting and less, let's say, face oriented. And by that I mean like the character archetype that is the face. Where I think we all played in D&D games either currently or previously. If you've been playing for a little bit, you probably had this experience where you have a character in the party who has good charisma, a sorcerer, a bard, a warlock, and they are able to talk their way out of situations. So anytime that there's some sort of social situation that comes up, everybody just kind of like turns and looks at the person with charisma and is like, eh, you do the, eh, you do the talking. So go talk to the guys. So I think a lot of that kind of comes up. And then you have the rest of the group just kind of like folds their arms and sits back. And I don't find that very fulfilling, both as a DM and a player, because I don't think that does a good job of mirroring real life conversations with a group. Like if we look at any sort of media or just real life, is like regardless of a person's inherent charisma or ability to speak, everybody talks in a discussion. It's not one person talks and everybody stands back, where every conversation feels like you're playing Family Feud, where it's like, nope, just the one person goes up there and talks, and the rest of us just flap politely in the background while I speak with Steve Harvey. Like it shouldn't be like that, because that's not really how conversations go. And people who aren't persuasive or good at talking or lose their cool or whatever, that happens in conversations all the time. In fact, it makes those conversations, at least in the aspect of media and entertainment, more interesting than having the person who's just always good at talking, always do the talking. And that's the only person who ever talks. So I do think that's giving it away, where we kind of remove that aspect where an entire pillar is, in the large part, resting on the shoulders of one specific stat and therefore one specific character. So I guess technically that's our goal. So why do we want to do that? We're gonna say that we want to make social RP. We're gonna say balanced, and now balanced. I'm gonna say more evenly spread. All PCs and players. So you don't have to worry about being like, this is something that I've thought about doing, is trying to decide or run a campaign where having all the players at the party, like in session 0, determine what their dub staff is going to be as a party. Like just one thing that the one blind spot that the party has that's just like we're just not good at this one thing, and choose an ability score and make it that. And most likely that's either going to be intelligence or charisma, because those are kind of the two dump stats. Hopefully they don't choose con. That would be a weird dump stat, and that would be really problematic for them if everybody had less hit points than they were supposed to have. So yeah, I think charisma or intelligence. Intelligence would obviously be for 5e 2024 in the way the game's designed. I think in previous editions you would have said that charisma was the dump stat when intelligence was tied to things like how many skill points you get at level up. So it determined a lot of your ability to do things, especially outside of combat. Where in 5e in 2024, intelligence is not useful and probably, besides the odd like history check or religion check or arcana check, not really useful at all. There's almost no intelligence saves in the game. It's not a particularly useful thing to do to have. So that is very much the dump stat. But having this idea that it's like choosing something that the party's just not good at. And so I think if I ran that campaign and said, okay, well, none of us are going to be good at charisma, that would be something where I would maybe look at something like this and be like, okay, what if we just tweak the game a little bit so that charisma's just not a stat? And maybe we can do some other things with that. And we could do some fun, different things with that. And then it would feel like everybody could do social interactions. They could talk to people and do those things and not feel like it was almost a guaranteed failure out the gate. Sometimes it can feel like if you don't have a party with anybody who has charisma, but since three of the classes and 3 of the 12, so 1/4 of the classes of base D&D 5e 2024 are charisma-based classes, you're almost guaranteed that at least one person is going to be playing a charisma class. There's a good chance somebody's going to be playing a charisma class. It's been a minute. It's been a real minute since I played in, even for like a one-shot or something like that, that I can remember playing. Having a group of PCs in which nobody had charisma. At least as a secondary stat. So it's rare. Let's put it that way. It's very rare. So, but I think you could do it. So why change the game? So we want to spread out our social RP more. I think it's already. I mean, that's probably the biggest one. And remove the weird one-off saves and specifics. We'll say, yeah, we'll do that, and we want to highlight more. We're going to say social / RP spells. Because the truth is that the way the things are kind of gone is that most of the people who have the cool spells that do things like disguise self, like friends, like charm person, those sorts of spells casting, things that are very geared towards social encounters, tend to be the classes that already have high charisma. So it really kind of just makes them even more overpowered, and that's why we have situations you'll hear Dungeon Masters lament about, like, oh, I can't really stop the party when they start talking to somebody because they roll too high. Now, of course, there's more DM advice to fix that, but it is sort of this underlying consistent issue that D&D, we'll say contemporary or modern D&D has, which is that being really good at charisma, and in addition to that, having spells that buff that ability even more, and skills, proficiencies, and expertise that bump that even more, and magic items that bump that even more, really makes it difficult to kind of feel like the social encounters have a balanced mechanic compared to the rest of the game. I think it's very easy. It's much easier for somebody like a bard or a sorcerer to get into checks that are into the mid to high 20s, even 30s, pretty early on, with a couple spells, a magic item, and some good stats, and of course good rolls. Then then you can see that happen even in doing attack rolls. I think those are a little bit more managed. Let's go ahead and move on. So those are the main things that I want to do. Is there anything else that I'm looking down here? Any saves? So like the saves are weird. And I think this. Yeah, let's do this, and maybe it addresses some inherent class issues. Why did this? Why is it doing that? I don't know. I don't know why it's doing this. Why did you decide to break the page here? I haven't the foggiest. Okay. We're gonna fix this. I have no idea why I decided to do that. Try this again. Why? I don't. I don't need a page break here. I have no idea why it's doing this. Anyways, we're gonna move on. Read the normal text. All right. So another thing I'm gonna address is like changing the game, making large sweeping alterations to a game like D&D. Almost anytime you see anything plastered like this online, and I of course also say this depending on the situation, is like if you're trying to heavily edit D&D to force it into a box that you're trying to fit it into, maybe just play another game that does this better. So let's talk about some games that do this a little bit better. I think Dogs in the Vineyard, where it and so these are games that have more, let's say, amorphous or we'll say flavorful abilities. Things that come to mind are things like Kids on Bike, where it'll be like it's your toughness or your forcefulness or something like that, which is both something that can be used in a very physical way, meaning that like you can force your will upon things, but also can be used in a social interaction when you're like, okay, what does forcefulness mean in a conversation? And it might mean something like an intimidate, or maybe like being kind of a bully, or just being loud and talking over everybody, like drowning out all the noise to make sure that you're heard. Those sorts of things have that more amorphous, flavorful things. Dogs and Vineyard is very much like that, and that's kind of one of my go-to examples because it's not a game that a lot of people know. It's a very weird game where you play as essentially rangers in the Wild West as part of the Mormon people settling into Utah. It's a very interesting game. It's a lot of I like it because it focuses a lot on these sort of regulators when you have people who have a very large amount of power and freedom to exert that power on the populace of the faithful, and the decisions they make when they have that power. Sort of like it's a little Harvard prison experiment. It'd be like, when you're given all this power and the legitimacy to wield it, how do you solve problems? And what does that say about you and your people? So if you're interested in that, I'd say go check it out. I'm not even sure where you can find it nowadays. I'm sure it's probably on DriveThruRPG or something like that. Anyways, it's a little bit of an older game, but it is sort of for a hot minute it was the game du jour. It was the game of the game of the day. So it had a quick spark. It's had its 15 minutes of fame, but it is kind of an interesting game to take a look at. So yeah, that's sort of the thing that I'm looking at. So why do you have these other games that do this a little bit more importantly? So why do we want to change that? And I think one of the things that when we're looking at change the game is that it is just one little weird piece of D&D ephemera that's like, we could just kind of remove it. In the same way, sometimes people look at that as like ability skills or proficiencies and be like, the game used to just not have these, and the game worked, so do we need them? So, and it's, I would say, like, if you were going to change something like one of the other stats, you have your big stats like your strength, your dex, and your wisdom. Is like, you can't change those stats. Those stats are so rooted into what makes D&D D&D that you could never really change those stats. Things like charisma, which all the way back to looking at things like comeliness, it's always been a weird thing, and it continues to be a weird thing. So I think that's one of the things we kind of look at is like, charisma is already a weird thing in the game, meaning that it's both physical attractiveness, like presence, and we'll say not. We're gonna say presence / magnetism, and communication. So it is these already, charisma stands in as these three very kind of different things, where you can have somebody who is very physically attractive, but they don't really have a lot of presence in a room, and maybe they're not very good communicators. You can have somebody who's got a lot of presence in the room, but can be not very attractive and not be very communicative. Generally, somebody's going to have some mix of all three of these things, but these are all kind of tumbled into one bowl, which is charisma, which is a lot different than when somebody says strength. We have a very clear idea of what strength means in the game. When somebody says dexterity, we have again, dexterity itself is already a little weird because it's both agility and manual dexterity, like your ability to do fine, precise things, as well as your ability to basically do tumbling acrobatics, as well as sometimes your quickness, even though that's not reflected in your speed. So again, D&D is already a weird game, but your ability to sort of dodge things, and sometimes your ability to hit somebody with a weapon, rather than when you're using a little bit of flair, a little bit of finesse, rather than strength. So it's already weird, but I think charisma is weirder because this tells you very specific things about your character that aren't often represented mechanically. So you're like, well, if you don't have high charisma, does that mean your character can't be attractive? Well, no, but also mechanically, kind of yes. And does that mean do they not have presence or magnetism, or do they have to have presence or magnetism? This is sometimes comes up where you have this duality. This comes up especially a lot sometimes with bards, sometimes with rogues. If you have a high dex, high charisma combo, where you're like, okay, how do you have somebody who has a lot of presence, so when they step into a room, they fill the room and everybody pays attention to them? How do you juxtapose that to somebody who's also very sneaky? Meaning that people don't often pay attention to them. Those things kind of thematically butt heads. So like, okay, how do you resolve that? So sometimes, and this happened yesterday actually in my game, and something that I've tried to do a little bit more, be like, okay, if you were trying to be sneaky about doing something and trying to accomplish something, trying to figure out which thing is more important to the player, which thing is more important to you, that you are hidden, that you stay hidden, or that you accomplish the thing. In this case that I'm thinking about from yesterday, when somebody's trying to get somebody's attention in the crowd, they're like, oh no, I'm trying to get their attention more than I'm worried about being seen. They're like, okay, so what I want you to do is we're going to split the difference and be like, okay, you're going to you can get the advantage on trying to get their attention. You're going to have a disadvantage on stealth. So it's more likely that you're more concerned about like waving your arms to get them to look at you than to ensure that nobody's looking at you. You kind of do things like that, and that's a very homebrew thing. It's hard to sort of when you have somebody who's got that high dexterity and stealth and potentially expertise in stealth, but also maybe has charisma and maybe something like intimidate or something like that, where they are an imposing presence in a room as well. And then communication. So communication is the weird thing, and we get into this problem a lot at a lot of tables where is the split about what the character concocts as a very well thought out reasoned argument versus poor die roll of a charisma character, a character that doesn't have any charisma. Like, which do you go with? How does that modify the roll? How do you set the correct DC? When do you roll? When do you just let the good idea happen? And the inverse of that being like, oh, well, you have a player at your table who's maybe shy or has a little bit of social anxiety or is just maybe a little bit more introverted and struggles to be able to, or they're not as well spoken, they struggle to, with words as a person, communicate what they're trying to do and how they're doing it, and then they're relying on the die roll of the character who's got the high charisma to do it. So it's already a little weird thing. We have a similar duality that comes up in sort of exploration mode, in the exploration pillar, where you have people who like, oh, I have this clever idea, and we do the clever idea, and be like, okay. Normally I'd make you roll for it or something like that, but sometimes the clever idea just works. And so there's not as many clear boundaries about how that mechanic should work on the social RP side with something like charisma. So I do want to, and another one that we want to highlight, because I'm thinking about it, is games. These are other games that if you want to check out more sort of social things, Exalted, or I think anything that's in the World of Darkness. So World of Darkness, if you're not familiar, that's the underlying game mechanics that there's a setting for vampire and werewolf and geist and Promethean, mage, other things that I'm forgetting. All those sort of modern games that kind of came out that White Wolf published starting in the 90s, right? 90s, yeah. I think it came out in the 90s, maybe late 90s. I can't remember. Maybe 1990 actually. Anyways, World of Darkness came out. Vampire the Masquerade was the first one that came out. So they have more than 6 sets. They have 9 sets, 9 abilities. So you actually have multiple social abilities. And one of the ones that I really like is I really like this idea where they have presence as one of the main things. So just your ability to sort of dominate a room and the people in it just through the sheer literal charisma of your personage. And that the nice thing about something like a game like World of Darkness is that the proficiencies, the skills themselves, and the ability scores are not married. So you can always make something, like to put it in D&D terms, you could always make a strength persuasion check if you wanted to do, or maybe a better choice would be a strength. I mean, you could make a strength persuasion check. I could think how that would happen, but a strength intimidation check. So if you want to play the barbarian and you want to lean into the barbarian being intimidating, which D&D at base level, contemporary D&D doesn't do a good job of, right? It talks about, we have these things down here. You don't have that presence. Because let's be honest here, a barbarian, so charisma's probably either charisma or intelligence is your dump stat, and the other one you probably got a 10 in. So you've got a +0 to that. You may be trained in intimidation if you wanted to be. And that gives you a +2. That means that on average you're going to be rolling a 12, a 13. And that's going to be failing a lot of DCs. But if you could use your strength on it, and you're like, oh no, I intimidate this person with a feat of physical strength, which we see that in media all the time, where they, somebody gets mad and they like crush the bottle they're holding or something like that. And you'd be like, oh, all right, yeah, roll me the intimidation check, strength plus, yeah, plus your proficiency if you're proficient in intimidation. And World of Darkness just does that out of the box. They're like, yeah, none of the ability scores are tied to any of the skills. So depending on the situation, you're always going to put two of those together, and that will figure out what your bonus is, which is something I do a lot more now in D&D than I used to. Now I'm like, yeah, I just find it gives me as a DM a lot more flexible way to call for rolls rather than the what is it however many skills we have. Skill proficiency is 13. Is that right? 13. Is that how many we have? Anyways, it gives me a lot more options. So instead of having 13, it's 13 times 6, which is a lot. I'm not going to do that math off the top of my head. It's a lot. That's all you need to know. So it gives you a lot more range. Now, obviously not always that makes sense, but that's what we're going with. So, yeah, I think we have more structured, we'll just say more structure for social and RP mechanics. Now, we know from D&D that 2/3 of the rules, at least, are basically around combat, and then everything that's not combat is kind of like hand-waved in a lot of contemporary D&D. Like, oh, how do you do dungeon crawling? You know, you crawl the dungeon. How do you deal with how do I set up a big social encounter? You just kind of do it. You're going to give me any frameworks on how to do that? Nah, you got this. We're putting the agency back on the DM to do what they need to do and run the game, rather than us just tell you how to run the game, which is a flavor. Indeed, that's a very old school approach. And then you have that third edition change in which they were like, we're going to lay out in excruciating detail everything that could happen, that we can think of that can happen. And there's a reason they do that. Again, it's very interesting to look into the history of the D&D and different D&D editions. Again, Gen Con last year, right? Last year. Yes, Gen Con 2024. There's a series of videos where they play through the different editions of D&D. Not all of them, but kind of the main pillar editions with the lead designers of the games as much as possible leading the game. Before they play each sort of one-shot, they have a session, sort of a Q&A session before where they talk about the history of the edition, where it started, the design of it, all those things, and then having watched those, now I understand a lot more about why third edition is the way it is, why all these rules were laid out in excruciating detail. It's because in second edition, they had so many problems with so many different tables that were running different games of D&D, in which people who went to play with a different DM felt like they were playing an entirely different game. So this tried to make it a little bit more homogenized, and that's why we have things like the core role mechanic and things like that. And then all these very specific details for how to run very specific circumstances, which third edition is kind of known for. So if you want to look for something like that, Exalted is a good game. Exalted is a wild game, if you've never heard of it. It is a power gamer's delight, but there are a lot of just social skills. It's got a very sort of like Pathfinder 2 kind of approach, except it's an older game than Pathfinder 2, where there's a lot of feats that you can pick up and a lot of gates. There's a lot of feat trees and stuff like that you kind of go through to lock things and make combo things but they have an entire like social climbs that you go through that give you the ability to do things. They have mechanics for like how to debate another person on a point, and how do you choose that, and having sort of a social battery version of things like hit points, and being able to like bait people into arguments and to win over the crowds who are watching you and things like that. Because that game is very much like the player characters play these almost mythical style, mythic status characters who are larger than life, and so who basically turn heads wherever they go as these ultimately powerful kind of creatures. They kind of remind me of what I think about like the Z fighters and something like Dragon Ball Z, where it's like, oh, there's regular people, and then there's like these people who are absolutely not regular people. These are like way different. So it kind of goes to that. But it is a fun game. I'd say check it out if you're interested in it. It's if you want to see kind of what more of a a highly structured kind of social aspect of a game would look like. I think Exalted is a decent. It's not the easiest game to understand at first blush. It takes a little bit, but you can find some videos and check it out. But if you're looking for something that's got some very strong social mechanics in it, Exalted is one that I know of that does do that. And so that kind of gives me an idea about how to do things after having played it. All right, so that's everything that we kind of look at it, wanting to change the game versus playing another game. So those are things that we would do. We do know that charisma is kind of a weird thing, but again, I think the charisma is the second easiest behind Constitution as far as an ability score that you could just pull out, and it's already such a weird thing in D&D when it's trying to combine this physical attractiveness, this presence of magnetism, and like a PC's ability to just do basic clear communication with people is already a weird stat, much weirder than something like dexterity or constitution or strength. I think intelligence wisdom kind of has that bleed over effect where it is a little gray. There's a lot of gray area between those. That's what you want to do. All right, so let's talk about actually changing it. So let's do that. Let me pull up the document because I think this is going to be a good thing where we're going to need to actually look at what we're looking at. We want some first-person sources, or I guess technically second person. But let me jump over here. Let me do stream. Here we go. All right, so we've got the 6 ability scores. Starts on page 10. It's a 2024 book. The basic ability scores. So we have charisma, confidence, poise, and charm. So that's what we have put under charisma as the 6 ability scores, just as our lines that they put in there. So we notice that it doesn't actually have... Poise is kind of an interesting one. Because poise, I think, is something that might be a little bit more wisdom, which is more like holding yourself together, which is generally, I feel like, something that is a mental fortitude thing, which is more of a wisdom thing, as it says right above it. So each ability score, and actually, let's just, instead of looking at both of these, let's make this a little bit larger so you guys can see it too. So let's do this, and then I'm going to swap this. Just to make it a little bit easier for everybody to see. There we go. Yeah. So we have, that's charisma, our confidence, poise, and charm. So, and that's pretty much all we get on it. Let's see if they give us some more. So, ability check examples, influence, entertain, or deceive. So that is persuasion, performance, and deception. They're very much skills that are tied to that. Wisdom, notice things in the environment or creature's behavior. So yeah, the perception, insight. Intelligence, reason, or remember. Remember is a weird thing to put as a stat, I feel like. It doesn't necessarily fit with other things, but... reasoning. So there is no just sort of reason skill. I guess investigation is the closest one. Maybe Arcana is to try to figure things out. That is a lot of the sort of intelligence checks. Is trying to take things that you know, things that you're perceiving, and trying to make those fit together and make sort of deductions off of that. Or inferences based off of that. So we don't get a lot with that. And then we have saving throws. Let's look at the saving throws. The charisma is assert your identity, which is weird. So when you have things like assert your identity, and which feels like that should be resist mental assault, as well as recognize an illusion as fate. So again, the charisma already is pretty weird as to what does assert your identity mean. Because if we think about some of the iconic spells that have charisma saving throws, the one that always comes to my mind is Banishment. And Banishment would be a mental assault, sort of, but you could technically dodge out of the way of a Banishment. So Dexterity also makes sense. And your identity doesn't really have anything to do with you, where you are. So it is a weird kind of explanation of that. Assert your identity, which then would make things like, okay, asserting your identity would be things like, what's the one where it's like enemies all around? It's not confusion. It's like the level up from confusion. So there's a confusion spell, which is very much a wisdom saving throw. Man, I used to have this. I used to have a character who had this spell. Enemies abound. Enemies abound, which seems like that would be an assert your identity one, where you're like, oh no, these are my friends, like because I am who I am. Or confusion being like I am who I am, so I'm not confused about who I'm supposed to be attacking. Any of those things that should confuse, those are things I feel like could fall under charisma saving throws, but don't. They fall under wisdom, and then you have things like banishment, which is very much a physical and or mental assault, and falls under your identity, which is interesting. So yeah, we got some same things in here. Yeah, and I think everything. Let's go down here. We can see our skills are associated with it: deception, tell a convincing lie, or wear a disguise convincingly. Intimidation, awe or threaten someone into doing what you want. We already talked about the barbarian problem that intimidation has by somebody who is, attractive, or what did they actually say it was? Let's look at it. Let me go back up here and say it actually was. Influence, entertain, or deceive. So influence makes sense. If you're trying to influence somebody, that kind of covers all your... I feel like influence covers that with deception too. I'm not sure you need to put deceive up there too. Influence is also... You can also lie to gain influence. And lots of people do it. So I'm not sure why that needs to be split up. So, yeah, the awe or threaten somebody into what you want to do, that's influencing, of course. But again, we have the barbarian problem, where it's like, why is the barbarian bad at intimidation? What it should be, it feels like in the fantasy, that should be the person who's really good at doing it. But for some reason not. Because they don't have any charisma. Performance, act, tell a story, perform music or dance. Dance is an interesting one. Dance is a fun one with performance because I would think of, yeah, that's a performance check, but dancing, I wouldn't say... Like, you could make an argument for it to be charisma-based. But I would also say that it's also dexterity-based. Because it's about coordination, often in dancing. Like, do you have how much control do you have over your body? How much coordination do you have? Those feel like very much a dexterity thing, as opposed to only a charisma thing. Like, I think you can make the argument for it that there's a lot of that sort of attractiveness and presence and magnetism, inherent magnetism, that you can argue is kind of the point of dancing, often. But the doing so is maybe a little bit more dexterity. This is one of the things where I was like, when I would rule that, I'd be like, oh, you want to make a dance, you want to dance for these people, I'd be like, okay, make me a dexterity performance check. I might do that instead. Which then would give me an opportunity if I had somebody like to open it up. Like I said, I want to open up the game a little bit. Be like, oh, you all need to impress this baron or local noble or whoever it is and his court. So what are you guys going to do that? And be like, oh, you guys can all make performance checks, but you can use whatever ability score you want. You tell me what you want to do with that. It's not necessarily, in the performance aspect, it's not necessarily your ability to do the thing, it's your ability to make it a performance in doing the thing. So it's like, if you wanted to be like, you have the monk come up and it's like, I'm going to break 20 boards, and to show off my martial arts expertise. But like, yeah, absolutely, you can make your dexterity or strength check, and plus adding a performance if you are proficient in performance, which the monk probably isn't. But that is something you can do, and you already have a leg up on that. If they wanted to make an argument for something else, I'd be like, Again, it'd be one of those things. It'd be like, do you want the performative aspect of it to be is more important, or more important? Is it more important that you break the boards, or that you make a good showing of breaking the boards? Because that'll determine if you're like, no, I just want to break the boards. I'd be like, all right, you can break the boards. And I'm just going to raise the DC because you're focusing on just the raw skill of that. So the feat that you're trying to accomplish has to be so impressive, and the way you do it has to be so impressive that you don't actually have to do any performative aspect of it. It's sort of like watching if you try to watch a magician who doesn't have any sort of charisma or showmanship about it. If they're just like, pick a card, is this your card? Yes, great, magic. Versus like, well, we all know magicians aren't going to be quite that cringe and that kind of magician. I don't know why that's my line, but that's my line. I'm going to draw. So that is an ability. So the things that are going to affect this the most are ability scores. So let's take a look at our ability scores. So I don't think that there's anything that charisma inherently does that necessarily another can't do. Mainly because we very rare to make charisma checks already. It's already pretty strange to make them. I'm gonna say, especially outside a social situation. So very rare spell saves, and specific class spell attacks. And I do want to bring up, I think this is very interesting. Oh, I realize you guys aren't looking at the same thing I am. Well, let me flip back over. Boop. There we go. So I think it's pretty rare that we see. Actually, I'm gonna blow this up a little bit so you guys can see it a little bit better. Can we do like 125 is actually smaller. Maybe 150. That's a little bit larger. There we go. Still keeps everything on the page. So we do have, I do want to call, the D&D kind of already has this baked in a little bit. If you look at anything that's like any of the spell casting that you get from, or abilities that you get generally from an ancestry, or something like the sidekicks that are set up in Tasha's, they're like, oh, you have the ability to cast a spell, and here are 3 different abilities you can use as the basis for casting this spell. And generally it's, you can use intelligence, you can use wisdom, or you can use charisma. So there's already this kind of fluidity that's built into the system. So it's like, we don't necessarily have to have charisma to do that, because we already have other things that do that. Now, I don't think, again, ability checks outside of skill proficiency checks are going to be real rare. I'm trying to think of an instance in which I just use a raw charisma check with no skills attached to it. That might be something like maybe if it was like a first contact situation, if you were contacting like for the very first time, maybe this is a remote village of like bullywugs or something that's like deep in the wilds, and they've never seen like elves or something like that before. And so you just need to make me a raw charisma check to just kind of gauge what their reception is to these sapient creatures that of the likes they've never met before. Like, are they going to be immediately hostile? Or are they going to do the El Dorado thing, and they're like, well, obviously you must be gods, or some variance in between to whether how they're going to interact with you, which is sort of a in old school D&D, we do that as just a straight up reaction roll. There's already a table that's built into that. Generally a 2d6. Well, depending on where you're looking, it's either a 1d6 or a 2d6 table. I mean, like, they either go from very hostile to very almost servile to you. They're very, very friendly towards you. That's why I like the 2d6 gives us a little bit of a bell curve, a little bit more normal distribution, which kind of pushes things back towards the middle of them just kind of being like neutral or guarded or friendly without them being too often being like, oh, they immediately attack you, or and they immediately try to make you their living gods or something like that. So we already kind of have that stuff baked in that we can do. So I think that's all we need to really say. We get down to the skill list. Skills with different abilities. Again, this is gosh, you are not looking at the same thing. At the bottom of the book, I'll just read it. There's a little block text. Skills with different abilities. Each skill proficiency is associated with an ability check. For example, the intimidation skill is associated with charisma. In some situations, the DM might allow you to apply your skill proficiency. Again, we use skill proficiency. They really need to. I thought we weren't using skill as a term anymore. Whatever. You apply your skill proficiency to a different ability check. For example, a character tries to intimidate someone through a show of physical strength. The DM might ask for a strength intimidation check rather than a charisma intimidation check. That character would make a strength check and add the proficiency bonus if they have intimidation proficiency. So, right, because the barbarian is the classic example. This used to be a variant ruling in 5e, and now in 2024 they're just like, oh, that is just how you can do it. They don't make it clear whether that's supposed to be. It's in the book. It doesn't say it's under a variant rule, so you are now well within your rights to do that. I just don't understand. Would be like, why did you even have the skill list with the ability scores instead of just being like, this is the skill, this is the ability that's usually associated with it. Not always, but usually. There is that. Yeah, I'm trying to think, like, there aren't any weapons that use charisma. There's very few tools that use it. Usually using the tool, like something like a forgery kit or a disguise kit, usually gives you some, confers some sort of advantage on some other charisma check you're doing. Generally deception. So the tools themselves usually aren't the thing. Because you get into weird things like something that happens with the bard all the time, where you have, oh, I have proficiencies in musical instruments, but I also have performance proficiency. So if I'm trying to play music for somebody, do I make a tool check or do I make a performance check? And very often they're going to be the same bonus most of the time anyways, so it doesn't really matter. Unless you're a bard that didn't take performance, which I don't even know if you could do that. I think you might just get performance. I'd have to go look. It's been a minute since I played a bard. I haven't played one yet in 2024, just 5e. But I think you get performance out of the box. Or do they? Doesn't matter. The likelihood is that you're going to take performance with the bard anyways. In most things. We'll also look down here, which you can't see. I'm looking at the actions list. None of the basic actions of D&D that are generally are focused on combat really have anything to do with charisma. The only one that comes up is that you can do an influence action, which is interesting. Make a charisma, deception, intimidation, performance, or persuasion, or wisdom animal handling check to alter creature's attitude. Like, I think it's a little weird that we don't use charisma for animal handling. Why? I think there are definitely situations where you could make a persuasion check to an animal, even though we have a totally different. Sometimes looking at whether if you can speak with animals. Rather than making an animal handling check, are you able to make a persuasion check? But then why do you include that in the list of things like druid spells when you're giving it to allow them to make a check that is suboptimal to them making probably what is their wisdom animal handling check, which is probably higher than their charisma persuasion check. So it kind of gets there's a lot of D&D stuff that kind of, especially when it comes to skills, where skills kind of step on each other's toes between ability scores and proficiencies. We're like, okay, where does one stop and the other one begin? What is a thieves' tools check? opposed to a sleight of hand check, which I think most people kind of go to, uh, that I've seen in 5e and beyond, where people are like, oh, I want to unlock this door. Okay, make me a sleight of hand check. It's like, well, it should be a thieves tools check, but it's weird because the sheets aren't written the way for tool proficiencies, aren't set up on the sheet the way that skills are, so it's understandable that like you actually have to sit down and be like, okay, +2 plus my dexterity. And most of the time it's going to be the same as sleight of hand, unless I'm a rogue, in which sometimes I might have expertise in one of those things, so it is a different modifier. So, let's see what else we got. Social interactions. So those were our abilities. So, I mean, there's not, like I said, there's some rare spell saves. There's a few spell attacks, anything that's kind of a magic attack, like a Vicious Mockery, that kind of stuff. Uh, Always interesting when you have attack spells that show up on multiple lists. So you know something like Firebolt, which is something that uh, like a lot of sorcerers get access to, but also is a wizard spell. So you're like, oh, well, you can obviously cast this with intelligence or charisma. So there's nothing particularly bound to charisma for it. So the only things that would be bound to charisma are the spells that only Bard has, only something like a Bard or a Sorcerer has, or Warlock, sorry. Um, and there aren't very many of those. And there's more Warlock spells, I think, tied to Warlock than any other. There are exceptions to that rule than any other class. Right? Except for obviously Wizard. But Charisma, anyways. Out of the Charisma classes. So let's look at the social interaction thing. Let me throw it back over. We look at that real quick. Here we go. Alright, social interactions, NPC attitudes, role-playing, ability checks. In such situations, the DM will typically ask you to take the influence action when you want a roll. Pay attention to your skill proficiencies. And then goes on to basically tell you the thing that we're actually trying to get away from right here. Pay attention to your skill proficiencies when thinking of how you will interact with an NPC. Use an approach that relies on your group's skill proficiencies. For example, if the group needs to trick a guard into letting them into a castle, the rogue who is proficient in deception should lead the discussion. Again, very much playing the advice to players, and I guess dungeon masters who are reading this, very much being like, oh, you should let the people who are good at the thing do the thing, and those should be the people who take point. Now, I think a lot of this, most people read that and will be like, oh, that's the only person who should talk. Like, no, it says lead. That's the person who's point, but that's like a captain of the team. Like, everybody's playing. Just the one person is the person who's kind of who we want to lead the interaction, but everybody else should be playing some sort of supporting role and should have some sort of interaction in that scene as well, which is a thing that doesn't often happen. Or sometimes it's like, okay, well, we have the one face person talks, and then everybody, like I said, stands in the back with their arms crossed, like, yeah, listen to that guy. I have no input on the situation, and I'm going to creepily watch this whole interaction from the corner of the room. So then it's weird. It's like, why did you bring 3 people to just stand in the background? Like, is this intimidation? Are you trying to intimidate me? Like, I thought we were here to have a conversation. We have this example of play. It's wisdom check. Is there anything in here that's like a charisma check? I'm not seeing one. Keep going. Let's see. He's toying with you. He delights in the destruction of all things good, like my dear sister. Gareth draws closer and compassionately asks Ismark whether his sister has been bitten by the vampire. Please make a charisma persuasion check to see how well he responds to your pastoral manner. You have advantage because he's friendly. Oh, good thing my first roll is a 7, but with advantage, not much better. Well, 10 plus 5 is 15. That's twice what you rolled. It's over twice what you rolled the first time. That's significantly better. A 15 is a perfectly good check in most situations. Okay, but what if this character... Actually, they don't tell us if this character's any good at checks. I guess they have a plus 5. We don't know what level they are, though. I don't know, if they use this example in other places, we probably would know. But yeah, I mean, it is weird. I think this is the one of the only parts in the book across the D&D where we show people like players in addition to player characters, where it gets a little meta with the art. I don't feel like that shows up very often. So enough that it's kind of weirdly noticeable. And that's really all you get. Like again, they really don't give you any framework, which is a big temporary D&D thing. Starting with fourth edition, I think third edition had a lot more stuff in there. Fourth edition was just like, oh, we'll make everything a skill challenge, which is okay. It's functional. It may not be the most fun thing, but it is the most robust or oftentimes interesting. But it is at least a system. But that's enough sort of like preamble. So let's get into the change. So we're gonna make our change. So we've got these things that those are things that charisma does. All right. So what are the things that if we're getting rid of charisma, what is that going to do? So ability scores, we know that the ability checks are just kind of used to influence things. So I think we're gonna kick charisma back to other abilities. So we have our other abilities. Let's just go through them. We have our strength, we have our dex, we have our con, our int, and we have our whiz. So what would those look like in the ability of doing something? I'm just gonna go with checks because I think that's the easiest way to show this off rather than saves. I think doing things like saves again for charisma, the only time the charisma saves kind of come up, um, because we don't have any mechanics in D&D, which is a weird thing. I know this is gonna be kind of weird if you've never thought about this before. We have a lot of framework like this stuff that we just read about influencing NPCs. We don't have any framework for PCs being influenced by NPCs and what they make, other than being like, oh, you whatever, because we don't really use passive insight as a trait. Be like, how does the NPC just convince you of something, not lies to you and whether you recognize they're lying, but do they just influence you? Uh, which I think that we stray away from that because I think a lot of people see that as being like, oh, that removes agency from the player. I'm of a mind there was like sometimes I agree with that depending on the situation, but also sometimes you can just be like, yeah, no, regardless of whether you agree with it as a player, like they make a compelling argument to your player character, which I don't necessarily have to convince you as a player, just in the same way I don't have to physically hit you as a player to deal damage to your character. He just convinces your character. So, and that's more of a role play. I take that oftentimes more as a like this is a role playing note for you to lean into it, rather than for you to get upset about it. Be like, okay, and then it kind of becomes if you don't want to be convinced of this as a player, like, okay, how do I figure out an in-game way to get my character to kind of stumble across this, and it's your own sort of fun little puzzle to undo as a player. Or generally, that's how I like to take that. I like to frame that. So, if we kick charisma back, we're making charisma checks. What would that look like? So most of these are obviously going to be social encounters because that's generally the only time that charisma is going to come up. So strength, I think this is like forceful speech, volume, and I think presence. Yeah, this is. I think all this could be handled by strength. If you wanted to make a strength persuasion roll, I'd be like, yeah, you tell me where you fill up the space, and you are loud. You have a big booming voice. You project your voice, and you fill out, and you fill up the space in the room. Dexterity, I think this is like cutting turns of phrase. Things like bon mots. Basically, anything that can be kind of brought down to having a silver tongue. I just keep forgetting to flip us back over. So anything that's a kind of turn of phrase, the bon mots where you like, haha, like a witty rejoinder. Yeah, it's essentially being witty. Essentially being witty is what we're looking at. So Constitution, I think this is the same thing that Constitution is already. This is sort of like I think this can be paying attention to a conversation. Boredom or frustration. I think it's perfectly reasonable to have like characters be like, oh, you're in this like long sort of maybe like political discussion. Maybe it's like a clan moot or something like that, where you're like, this is going to be like a 4-hour thing. Like you have to keep yourself motivated and paying attention, and you're basically enduring sitting there without getting incredibly frustrated as people like circle back upon themselves to talk more about the same thing. Primarily what I do in streaming, which is circling back on myself. So paying attention to those conversations, avoiding boredom, frustration, things like that. I think that's a good use of how you use con in a very social situation to make an ability check. Intelligence, yeah, I mean this is going to be sort of like in sort of like I think that's like an incisive comment. This is sort of a logos approach. Logical and well thought out reasoning. Though you could say that's also wisdom too. So maybe we'll just keep that. I'll keep the incisive comments. This is something like where I'm thinking more of like an investigation. Like you picked up on a tell, which would be something more of wisdom, but you use that, how you twist that and use that and be like, oh, I know how to turn their weakness into a strength for me, kind of thing. So this is more of a, I mean, wisdom is the only other ability that already has some social stuff because we already have perception and insight going on. But wisdom, this can be the old like I'm going to put simple contra-lawyer. I'm put a simple contra-lawyer. And kind of using those like, oh, I know a few things, and very sort of layman's terms. And what other things we could be like, sort of like framing the argument or something of that nature. Hold on just a moment. Hey, look at something. Okay. Just make sure. Alright. So that looked weird. I had to make sure we were still streaming. What about not a notification, but something weird showed up. I don't know what that means. That's right. We're not gonna worry about it. We're gonna keep moving on. So hopefully the stream didn't drop. I don't think it did. Doesn't look like it. But it did just do something weird to me. So we want to make sure. So I think if you put things in like a layman's terms or a sort of wisdom would be like, I think it's sort of like cutting through things like deception, intimidation, etc. Yeah, I think wisdom's a very easy one to do. Again, there's still that little bit of intelligence wisdom crossover where you're like, oh well, if you have a put out something that's a well thought out reasoning. And so we'll say, yeah, I'm going to change this. So I'm going to choose, and so we're going to cut this. We're going to use that demo, and so intelligence is more about showing like this is our logical approach. We're going to show, and we're doing it by the numbers. Here are the facts. Here are the numbers. Here's what you need to know. These are the very specific things that we know. Deductions we've learned from that. Simple country lawyer, layman's terms, and we're going to put well thought out reasoning. Being like, wisdom is often like taking all the different disparate pieces of information and weaving them together into a cohesive sort of argument. So yeah, I think it's very easy to take charisma and be like, charisma, get out of here, kick it, throw it to the side, and be like, we can just take what we have and just be like, okay, now everybody can. Everybody, if you look at this, everybody has an approach now in a social situation that they can play with. Everybody's all the PCs that are not charisma, all the PCs that aren't charisma based and wouldn't be charisma based, all have a way in which they can make an approach in a social conversation, and the way that they can leverage things. So you could be like, okay, I'm going to use my, this big conversation's kind of getting out of hand. I'm going to sort of cut through the noise using my strength to like get above everybody and drown out everybody and draw attention to our group who is trying to make a point. Cool, that's forceful speech. Give me a strength persuasion, either strength persuasion or if you want to, strength intimidation check. Da-da-da, there you go. Everybody's attention's drawn towards you. Dexterity, you're like, oh, well, we've got this person who maybe you're having an argument with in front of let's say the king, and that you rely on your person with dexterity to kind of do the back and forth. Your people who have dexterity and intelligence are going to be your people who are kind of your social DPS, who are going to be like, oh, I've got this cunning turn of phrase where I get the crowd on my side by using this, by cutting away at you, by using my silver tongue and literally running circles around you with my dexterity of tongue. And then for the intelligence side, being like, oh, well, I've got this incisive comment about something you said, and be like, if that were the case, and things like that. The sort of like gotcha moments, be like, oh, I know this one specific piece of information that you've occluded in your statement. Be like, ha, this gotcha. Why didn't you tell the king about this part of your plan? Kind of thing. Constitution is very much the long game. Is be like, oh, I'm just going to do the diplomatic, the social equivalent of a boxing strategy of being like, I'm just going to go for rounds. I'm just going to work the body, and I'm just going to try to outlast them. I'm going to try to keep the conversation going and circling back on itself till they basically give up. That's what I'm going to try to do. I'm just going to try to endure them out. I'm going to try to run them out. So we talked a little bit about that. Again, using those facts and numbers and being like, I'm going to do, maybe it's like, I'd like to do a deception check using my intelligence by doing the things that are always done with things like statistics, or making maybe some logical leaps that maybe aren't super well founded. They're like, yeah, that's probably not it, but I could infer that that is the case. I'd let you do something like an intelligence deception check. Very much do that. Wisdom, we kind of talked about that. It was like, well, this is just the world as I see it in plain and simple terms. And this is how I think that the thing should go, because I think that this makes the most sense for the most amount of people. And this is my understanding of the situation. Breaking down is sometimes maybe a very complex topics into very sort of more simplistic. It's the simplistic terms. It's the sort of Star Trek analogy, or the Star Trek analogy effect. If you've ever watched old Star Trek, especially old Star Trek, where they like they talk about some complicated sci-fi mumbo jumbo, and then one of the characters will be like, "Oh, so it's like when blank does blank." It makes it like a very simple thing that everybody can relate to, and then you as the audience member are like, "Ha, I understand this gobbledygook you just said in sort of a way that I can understand it now because I don't know things." I'm trying to whatever the crystals are from like the engine room and be like, okay, I don't know how a crystal engine runs. So you said a bunch of stuff and I don't know what that means. And they're like, oh, well, it's like when this does this. Like, oh, now I understand. And so you can use wisdom in that way. So yeah, I think that's very easy. And since charisma is almost only used as far as ability checks and things of that nature, almost exclusively in social situations, I think you can use all these other ones in a much more broad way to do much different things. And then you can start making a little bit more interesting social encounters. If you're like, oh, there are, of these now 5 ability scores, there's maybe one ability score that the person you're talking to or the crowd or whatever it is that you're trying to have this social encounter with is really resistant to, and maybe one that they're really actually very vulnerable to as far as you trying to make checks to try to get through the scenes in a non-combat kind of way. So perhaps they again, let's go with the king example. If you use this forceful speech and you're like, you can't really do that over the king. Like the king's not going to be impressed by you just being loud. King or queen or regent or whoever it is not going to be. If you just make a scene or try to speak, especially over them, speak louder than they are, you are not going to win any friends and allies that way. So they're going to be very resistant to this, which means that I might give them like a +5 to the DC, or make when they make the check, make it at disadvantage, and then like now that you've made the check once, you learn that, oh, this is probably not the route to go. They seem particularly resistant against that. But maybe they're really vulnerable, so maybe I give them advantage or a -5 to the DC when they use intelligence. It'd be like, oh, they just one of the things that this regent doesn't have is they don't have information, they don't have boots on the ground, they don't understand the situation, so they need facts. They want the facts and they want the numbers and they want the like hard evidence about what's going on so they can make an informed decision. So if you do that with your intelligence, then yeah, you're going to get the DC is much lower. Maybe you get advantage on the roll depending on how you want to rule that as a DM. Like now there's a way for you guys, and maybe they're just kind of neutral towards the other 3. And now that already gives, in a very easy way, gives any social encounter a lot more meat to kind of chew on. Now you have some more things you can do, and everybody has a role to play, and that would be a thing where I'd be like, okay, here, I don't know, I might tell them the DC, I might not. I guess it would depend on the situation. And then I'd be like, okay, you're all a part of the discussion. We're going to go down the line. Everybody has their thing, and now you don't need the thing like the book says, where you need somebody who's just specifically good to lead that. It's like, yeah, it'd be helpful if you have somebody who is, if you're trying to persuade let's say you're trying to persuade the armorer to give you a discount, it probably helps to have the person who actually has the skill training to lead it. But at the end of the day, at least in 2024, that's generally going to be what, a +2 or a +3 in most games, depending on what level you are. And we know that most games don't end up going above that very much. So it's very rare that they're going to have a +4 or +5 opposed to somebody else in the party. So I mean, a good roll or using the right ability score check when you're trying to make that persuasion actually accounts for a lot more than just being proficient at it. So it's about making a choice, trying to make the right choice, leaning into your strength, and then being like, oh, that didn't work, and then maybe trying to come back from it. And this might be something where if you were trying to do something, I wouldn't want to make just one, but if I was going to be like, oh, my PC, the fighter, yeah, let's say fighter. No, let's say paladin. My paladin wants to go get an upgrade to plate armor or whatever. They finally got to go for it, and they want to haggle a little bit and be like, okay, you're gonna make a persuasion check, unless you're gonna lie to them about it. And it's like, no, I'm not gonna lie to them about it. All right, so it's gonna be a persuasion check. What ability score do you want to do? How do you want to do it? Well, I'm pretty strong as a paladin, but I don't think I get the idea that yelling at a merchant is probably not the greatest way to get the bonus, to get a discount. I've got pretty good con, so maybe if I just refuse to accept their pricing and just continue to haggle them, maybe they'll get frustrated, and maybe they'll just be like, yeah, whatever, you can have the price. Or they'll get it frustrated. If I fail, they'll kick me out of the shop. So I could do that. I could also do wisdom. I'm going to go with the con angle. Or actually, maybe I go with the wisdom angle first and be like, my wisdom's all right. I'm going to be like, oh, well, I protect the city. I'm facing down the evils that are threatening this community. So it'd be nice to get a discount on some of those things. Just because I think of that as a debt I've already paid to the community. Okay, cool. Yeah, roll me a wisdom persuasion check. If it passes, great. And this would be a thing where I'd probably do like a rock, paper, scissors thing, best 2 out of 3. Be like, okay, you're going to make at least 2 rolls as you guys kind of go back and forth. We're going to make them separately in case you want to change. So let's say we roll the wisdom. Let's say that you pass the wisdom. Like, great, I passed the wisdom. Do I want to, or maybe I failed the wisdom. Maybe that's more important. A better example. Oh no, I failed the wisdom check. Right. He's like, yeah, well, I don't know once I give you the plate armor whether you're going to stick around or not. And I'm still trying to run a business here. And, I got mouths to feed. So you fail the wisdom check. The paladin's like, dang, I guess I'll try the Constitution. I'm just going to refuse to take that no as an answer and just keep trying to whittle them down. All right, maybe the Constitution persuasion check. And do that stuff. And then maybe that passes, and maybe you find out that, oh, he's actually weak to that because he has a bunch of work he's got to do. So he's like, the armor's like, I don't have time to spend an hour talking with this guy. And then if you fail that, that would be 2 fails, and you'd be like, I'm kicking you out of the shop. It's like, all right, we're done here. Get out. Or if you pass, they're like, oh. Like, yeah. And you see that he's flustered a little bit, so you have advantage on your next check, and then you do the 3rd check, and hopefully you pass. I guess it doesn't matter because you get. Oh no, well, on 3rd because you failed the first one. You do that 3rd pass. You succeed again. The armor's like, look, all right, sure, I'll take the deal. I got other stuff to do. Here, I'll have your plate armor fitted. Let's take your measurements. I'll fit it for you, and it'll be ready tomorrow. And you feel like he's a little bit exasperated. So you're like, maybe this didn't make the greatest. Maybe you didn't earn a friend here. You didn't make a friend here with the armor. Whereas you might have if you had convinced them with the wisdom check to be like, no, this is in your best interest to help me. But you didn't get the thing you wanted. So you got a short-term gain, but maybe not necessarily a long-term expense, but you didn't grow any bonus points for the long term either. The ability checks super easy. Saves. So again, there's very few spells that have charisma saves. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what spells have charisma saves outside of management. Let's see. The DM commonly asks you to use charisma when you make a saving throw to resist certain magical compulsions, except those that would overcome your sense, especially those that would overcome your sense of self. So, okay, I just looked up real quick. So there are 3 that have pretty close situations, 3 spells that have notable spells that have charisma saving throws. There is Bane, Banishment, and Calm Emotions. So, I don't think there's any reason in which Bane, which is the other side of Bless, isn't just a Wisdom saving throw. So Bane's just going to be a Wisdom saving throw. Banishment, again, that's a magical sort of compulsion. Most of that stuff falls under wisdom already. Now, are we just leading into wisdom being a more powerful or more potent part of the game than it already is? Yeah. But we could also maybe make banishment an intelligence saving throw. There's not very many intelligence saving throws either. And I'm not sure there's any reason why it couldn't be intelligence. Because again, I think there's a lot of gray area between wisdom and intelligence about what they could be. And I think if you wanted to make sure that banishment, which I think is weird for it to be charisma already, because that means that a lot of monsters can get banished really easily, especially big nasty monsters that just don't have charisma because they're not talky monsters. They can banish them pretty easily. Unless of course they have like legendary resistances, so you got to whittle them down for 3 rounds, and then you can banish them. And you're like, well, if I whittled them down for 3 rounds, I don't need to banish them. I'm gonna probably kill them on the 4th round anyways. By the 3rd round we've gone by where they've used all their legendary resistances to just bypass the saving throw. They're probably on death's door already, and if not, it's really not probably useful to use banishment. Banishment's like an early. I like to think of it as an early combat spell. That's the thing you want to throw out on like the 1st round, maybe the 2nd round if you're trying to get them to have disadvantage on the saving throw first. Try to set up a situation for that first. But I think about banishment. You want to use banishment because you don't want to have the fight. Especially with an extraplanar creature, and you can be like, nope, extraplanar creature, you gotta get out of here. That's what I think about for banishment. So it doesn't work very well. But I do think because it works particularly well. Banishment works particularly well on monsters that are not talky, which makes me think that it would work equally well on characters, on monsters that are not thinky, where most monsters have a halfway decent wisdom saving throw. Strength, con, and wisdom tend to be their best saving throws for most monsters. Sometimes dexterity if they're a dexterity build instead of a strength build, but most it's strength, con, and wisdom. Are their good saves. So moving it from charisma to intelligence would still keep that sense where you would be able to knock out something that's I'm trying to think of a big nasty creature that's not thinky. I mean, it's still going to be hard for characters like beholders and stuff like that. Like, that's still going to be tough for mind players. Which might make mind players a little bit more terrifying, which is cool. Not having that one spell, they can just get rid of them. What's big? I'm trying to think of a big nasty. I don't think Astral Dreadnoughts have very high intelligence, so you could probably send them back, but I mean, they're already huge anyway, so if they're on the material plane, that's already a big problem. But you could do that. But yeah, I think intelligence will stand in most cases for charisma here if you're looking for most monsters to be kind of bad at the save. And then we have Calm Emotions, other things. So those are the 3 big spells. And I think, yeah, that makes sense for intelligence too. You could make it a wisdom save. I could see it going either way. You could do the wisdom route, and yeah, maybe actually I think I'm going to change that. I think the wisdom route makes the most sense. I wish it wasn't intelligence save, but I think wisdom makes the most sense because you're most starting like, oh, somebody's trying to calm your emotions and. Yeah, well, maybe not, because that's very situational, so maybe it does make more sense. Intelligence check. I reconvinced myself. So, I was thinking wisdom, because, like, if you have a hostile party who's trying to calm you down, like, trying to bring a berserker out of rage, and be like, oh, well, that would be wisdom to know. It feels like that would be very wisdom-based to be like, no, these people are not my friends. I recognize them as not my friends. I'm not going to listen to them. Which is already kind of baked into the spell anyways. But then I was like, no, maybe that's more an intelligence read on the situation. And kind of, if we lean into intelligence more about being that sense of self, since we got rid of charisma, so I think that makes the most sense. is kind of recognizing in a more investigative manner rather than a perceptive manner. I think maybe that makes more sense for common emotion. So it's not necessarily. I would see wisdom, but that wisdom wouldn't necessarily make sense in other contexts where you do not have context in which to make that wisdom check. So maybe it's a little bit more of just an intelligence thing, an inherent thing that you know. So those are the big saves. Other things. The other probably big one is the Umber Hulk. Which are very fun creatures, but they have their confusion eyes. I'm just looking over here to see if anything else. Oh, spells that require saves, charisma saves. Banishment, calm emotions, dispel evil, divine word, escaping from a force cage, penetrating a magic circle, choosing not to be affected by a seeming spell, planar binding, an involuntary plane shift, a hopelessness effect of a symbol spell, and zone of truth. Monster abilities that require charisma saves, ghost possession, Umber Hulk's confusing gaze. Confusing gaze is already a weird one because most, like the confusion spells, as you'll notice, were not in that list. The confusion spell and things like enemies abound and stuff like that, those were all wisdom saves. So as is things like color spray and stuff like that like enthrall people, like all of those are already wisdom saves. So why are these random ones charisma saves anyways? So I think most of that makes sense. So I think the confusing gaze makes sense to be wisdom because every other sort of mind control thing, Gaius, all that stuff, are all wisdom based. So I don't know why you would do that. Also, some of these are like divine word, zone of truth, stuff that's already clericy adjacent. Makes sense to be wisdom saves. Dispel evil, again, another sort of wisdom one, kind of makes sense. Penetrating a force cage, penetrating a magic circle, giving a force cage. That's wizard shit. That should be an intelligence save, I think. Involuntary plane shift, again, yeah, that kind of falls in very much with like banishment. So we move that to being an intelligence save. So maybe that makes more sense to be an intelligence save. And same thing with planar binding. Though I could see a world in some of these are like constitution things. Like planar binding maybe seems like a constitution save. Because it's something that literally binds your body. As is plane shift. As is banishment. So you could make those con saves. As they deal with your physical body and moving it. Ghost possession is also a charisma save. Because again, it feels like they started with this clear idea when they were designing 5e and being like, okay, anything that deals with your sense of self and messes with that should be a charisma saving throw. And then they didn't do that with a lot of the confusion stuff that kind of addles your mind and screws with you like that. And they were like, oh, that stuff. You're being able to recognize your allies from foes. Wisdom, not charisma. Yeah. So it's very gray. So I think those are sort of the big ones as far as combat's concerned. So actually doesn't come up all that much. That's only a handful of spells and a few monster abilities. There's two that I brought up, but I think there's probably some others behind it too. This person, they're talking about banishment. I like to think it's just, I will now banish your soul. No, I'm too hot to be banished. Because again, charisma's kind of a weird ability score. So let's look at proficiencies and skills. So we talked about it a little bit already because they're all social skills, but we have our deception, nation, persuasion, performance, performance. So yeah, like I said, the way that I play now is like I divorce all those from the ability scores anyway, so that way I can mix and match whatever feels like the most ability. So if you wanted to do, and then I think you can get rid of things like sleight of hand, which is kind of deception but dexterity. So I think it would allow you to trim up the stuff too. Where sleight of hand is kind of already kind of a wibbly wobbly thing, because I mean, how often do you really want your rogues pickpocketing people, which is mostly what sleight of hand is used for in my experience in games. Though just things to like steal stuff, mostly. So you have to be kind of like, how often do you want your people to steal things? And that is kind of a dexterity deception check to be like, hey, don't look at me. Whereas doing something like close-up magic would be something like a charisma sleight of hand check. So deception, but if we were going to tie it to ability score, what will we tie it to? I don't know. Deception, I think, has to go to, based off of what we said up here for these social things. Silver tongue, turning a phrase, von Motz, doing that sort of stuff. I think that all falls here, so that's going to be Dex. Intimidation, I don't really see a reason for it not to be strength. Because I think most people feel intimidation is strengthening, anyway, strengthening your imposing presence, right? Performance, I'm going to say wisdom. I think. I'm going to say that because a lot of performance is, being a successful performer is about reading the room and understanding who you are performing for. Which is a lot of very insight kind of based kind of stuff, which makes me think, oh, it must be closer to wisdom then. And persuasion, just our basic, we're gonna tell somebody. Well, the only ability score we haven't put down here other than con would be intelligence. So let's round it down and just make it intelligence. So persuasion is about you being able to make those incisive comments, to be able to like lay out well-reasoned arguments, even though that is under wisdom. But having the facts, having the supporting evidence to make your claim. So yeah, again, like I said, I play now where I have these things totally divorced, and depending on whatever you're trying to do, and that's the way that I try to inform it when I'm running games, to be like, you tell me what you want to do, what are you trying to do, and then I'll try to figure out what check makes the most sense out of that. And if not, sometimes I'll ask. I'll be like, you tell me what check you would like to make, and then they get to mix and match things if they want as well. And now, if they are like, I want to, we'll use the paladin again as the example of the armor. I want to make a strength persuasion check, and I'll be like, okay, you can. I'll let you know that's probably, and then like I said, like I explained previously, it's like that's probably, you don't think getting loud with a shopkeeper is going to get you a discount. You're not sure that's going to, you're going to try to browbeat this person into doing something for you. Be like, and when they kind of have all the power in the situation. Unless they really need, like, you would have to come up with a reason where you know that they really need the money. And then at that point, it kind of almost becomes more of an intimidation check. Almost, depending, because it's almost a little bit more extortion at that point. Maybe. But for now, we'll just leave it as intelligence. Alright, our classes. Well, we've got 3 classes that are very heavily used. We've got our bard, we've got our sorcerer. That's not how you spell sorcerer. And we've got our warlocks. So, if you followed if you've seen the stream that I did where I talked about My thoughts about making my own TTRPG system, and one of the things I looked at, and I believe we went over this again, is that I would, first of all, Warlocks are wisdom based. Uh, there is, I think, narratively, not a large gap between being something like a cleric and a warlock. It's really about the relationship, the personal relationship that you have with this extraplanar entity, so this personage of power that grants you this stuff. So a cleric is one of many who's devoted to an already established god. I can see warlock being like, this is my new god. This is somebody who's making a new religion or advocating for a creature who's maybe trying to ascend to godhood, trying to do that. So I feel like wisdom makes the most sense for a warlock. And I talked about this in that stream where I talked about, well, most powers, so magic powers in D&D and other similar games, kind of only come from three sources. Either it's from yourself, or it's from studying, or you get it from another entity. Clerics and warlocks both get, clerics, warlocks, paladins, all get their power boon to them from a different entity. So they kind of all work the same. So I think a warlock to me is somebody who, if depending on how the player plays it, could be like somebody who is kind of founding a new religion or being the prophet of a new god. This is somewhat similar to basically how Jester is played in the second campaign of Critical Role. Jester's very much, like, I could see him very much a warlock build Jester doing the same thing, where they're trying to sort of establish worship. And that could be the contract between them. So sorcerer is inherent. So I'm going to go ahead and say con. So this is very interesting. In this, so we actually have some precedents for this. So in 4th edition, they did a lot of, every class basically had the ability to use 2 different ability scores as sort of their prime ability score. In the same way that it's like, you can make a dex fighter or a strength fighter, you can make a strength or dex monk, very similar. So it gave you a lot more flexibility. They had choices between 2 different ability scores for saves and stuff like that. There was a lot of versatility to kind of ensure that people were roughly on the same foot most of the time, regardless of whatever your build was. Very smart design-wise, but it does sort of flatten out design, which is some problems some people have with 4th edition. I thought it was fine. Teach their own. But so we do have precedents with spellcasters having Constitution instead of Charisma. Now this was technically for a Warlock, which was a very interesting choice. But I don't see. We know that sorcerers gain their power from literally their blood and lineage. That is 100% their body. That is their body. Or you can talk about their soul, right? But we don't have a soul stat. Even charisma doesn't, as it's laid out in 2024, it doesn't have anything to do with your soul. It's kind of more your personality. So I think it's very easy to just move sorcerer over to being like, oh, you're con based, which means that you can have a sorcerer now that has a bunch of hit points, which is cool, and could probably help a spellcaster, like a sorcerer, who often, I think sorcerers and wizards are the only people who have, no, maybe warlocks too. They have D6 hit dice, so they need some hit point help anyway. So instead of just making it their core thing, be like, oh, they're good at Constitution, and then that allows you to make your sorcerer, your secondary ability score for your sorcerer, maybe tied to a different subclass, an archetype, or or you can just, instead of basing it off the subclass, just be like, what sort of sorcerer do you want to play? Do you want to be a sorcerer who is also good at dexterity, so you have a high AC and you have a high AC, finesse weapons are good for you. That's very we already have some warlock builds that are like the and you use a weapon, hex blades, things like that. So you can definitely go that route. Or if you wanted to go, oh, I want to go high in wisdom, you want to lean in a little bit on the wisdom side of things and be like, oh, you're just a very perceptive person in addition to that who picks things up. You can line in and be strength if you want to be a big beefy sorcerer, which could be a fun build. And would also go into the weapons thing. If you instead of wanting to use finesse weapons, if you wanted to be like, oh, you're almost in a sort of way, kind of like a weird barbarian where you have a bunch of hit points and you're able to swing big weapons and do that sort of thing and be like get into the melee a little bit, get into the scrum. So there's different options there. You can build them intelligence, and they could be sort of like a faux wizard or like a hedge wizard kind of thing if you want to do that kind of build. And then bards. So bards are kind of weird because bards are just a weird class in general. This might be maybe it'd be helpful if we pull up the actual description of bards. Let me get back to the beginning of this document. Holding. And so we can actually look up bards. Bard. Okay. Let's flip this over. Pow! Bards. It's a bird. Alright. Invoking magic through music, dance, and verse. Bards are experts at inspiring others soothing heroes. Bards believe the multiverse was spoken into existence and that remnants of its words of creation still resound and glimmer on every plane of existence. Bard magic attempts to harness those words which transcend any language. Which is, I read that as being very much sort of the words of power, which other classes have access to. So it's not just a bard thing already. I think there's one word, power word that I think bards get that nobody else gets. I think. I don't remember which one it is, but I think they have one power word spell. And again, all the power word spells are super high level. Like they're level 7, 8, 9 spells. So those are not something that low-level bards have access to. I think if they had gone back and flavored things more around this, that would make more sense. But a lot of the bard spells aren't flavored around this. Understanding these words of creation, and how do you invoke a word of creation through dance? So bards are already kind of a weird class. I think that bards almost make more sense as a subclass of other classes. I could very much see a fighter that's like a skald, which is like a very College of Swords kind of bard style of bard, and be like, oh, you want to take having you want to be a strength fighter who's sort of subclass based off of maybe whatever your secondary ability. That would probably be how I would design things. Be like, okay, you have primary ability score for whatever your class is, and then whatever secondary score you choose kind of determines what subclasses are kind of more optimal for you. Be like, oh, well, if you want to take charisma as your secondary class, we'll bring that in, and maybe you do this more like Skald, like Viking Skald, troubadour kind of thing, where you're like a Yaskir kind of dandelion kind of character, where you're like, yeah, well, you're a fighter who also can like tell stories, recite the sagas and stuff like that, and you bring your credence to it as being sort of a person who has seen battle and has done those things, which I think works a little bit better than bards do out of the box. So yeah, it's already kind of weird because you talk about, okay, we talked about sources of magic. There's really only the 3 sources of magic in D&D, which is that it's from you. Okay, so that doesn't fit bard because bards bring it from this thing of creation. You get it from some sort of extraplanar entity. Yes, maybe, because the words of creation assumes that there is a creator who built out the multiverse. So depending on whatever the myth and history of how existence came to be in whatever setting you're playing in, potentially a god or a titan or something, or It could be another sort of like more ephemeral thing, like a Gaia situation, which kind of puts you in the same situation as druids and rangers, where you're sort of drawing your power from the very world itself in nature. So that puts you in that sort of situation. Or you get it through study. So Bard's life is spent traveling, gathering lore, telling stories, and living on the gratitude of audiences. Like any other entertainer, but the Bard's depth of knowledge and mastery of magic sets them apart. And we also have the colleges. So I think there's a way that, like I said, Bard to me often seems like a better, rather than being its own standalone class, should be a subclass for a lot of different classes, a different archetype for a lot of different classes. So having a Bard that is a wizard subclass, because we're talking about that knowledge and mastery of magic, that's wizard shit. And they're in colleges. That's also wizard shit. So that already gives you three ways of being like, okay, and Bard is maybe just like a very wizard adjacent in that way. Especially since this Bardic magic doesn't really. The remnants of the words of creation is this very ephemeral thing that's not a real thing. It's not a real thing that the Bards really draw upon in practice in their actual design. So we have that was a nice fluff paragraph at the beginning, and maybe that was in the design document or something very similar to it, but it didn't actually end up kind of making it across the finish line because we had to put in all the old cruft, all the accumulation, secretion of what a bard is in D&D across however many years since the Bard's introduction, which is I can't remember. There's a Bard in first edition, right? I'm pretty sure there's a Bard in first edition. I'm trying to remember. I think it's one of the later edition classes, right? I'm pretty sure. So we're gonna say at least 35 years plus of the game. So we have all this accumulation of what is a Bard that is the weight of D&D's history that we have to pull into each new edition that we just can't kind of get ourselves away from. Or the old grognards will waggle their fingers and be like, that's not what a Bard is. The Bard is these things because that's how these people made it 20 years ago. And even though none of those people work at the company, and in many cases are not even alive anymore, much less 50 years ago, looking at stuff and being like, the game can change and maybe should change. It doesn't. I don't want D&D to be weighed down with an anchor around its neck being its heritage for the sake of just having the heritage, which sometimes we get a lot of, especially in 5e. 5e 2024, I've talked about this before, is kind of this. It's the greatest hit CD or album of D&D, where they just kind of cherry picked a whole bunch of stuff that people like from different editions of D&D, and then you cobble those together into a system. It's very vanilla, not in a bad way, but in a very neutral way. 5e 2024 is a very neutral game for D&D. It doesn't really take any big swings. It is, the way I described it when it came out is, it's everybody's second favorite edition of D&D, which I think still stands. I think if you play another edition of D&D, you may or may not fall in love with that edition. And then it just kind of becomes, it's the thing that everybody can agree on to play. If you have a person who wants to play old school essentials, and you have a person who wants to play Pathfinder, and you have a person that wants to play 4th edition apparently, and they're like, oh, well, how do we get this game group together? And be like, we're going to play 5e 2024 D&D, and everybody's probably going to be like, okay, that's fine, I guess. It's not my favorite. I'd rather play something else, but it's better than playing probably one of the other editions of D&D that I don't really like. So yeah, I think this Bard is the thing. We're just going to do basically a full deconstruction. So I think you go into a wizard, or you go into, if you want to focus on more the talent aspect of the Bard, like it is their extreme talent that manifests itself as magic. Then you go the sorcerer route. So yeah, we'll do wizard, and that's kind of like study. You can do sorcerer, which we know is going to now be a con build, which is more like inherent or sort of like their body, like their, let's say, talent. Inherent, let's say talent. Yeah. So it's something that's inherent about them, like a sorcerer, where it's not like they have a dragon lineage or something like that, or uh, grandma did it with an angel kind of energy, but has more like I am tapped into the weave of magic in the world, and I have this ability through my talent to transcend what dance is into something else. So if you want to play a bard that does it that way, I can definitely see that going that way. If you want to be somebody who's like, no, it's the stories I learn and the experiences I gain and the knowledge that I find and I seek, well, that's just wizard shit. That's just studying. And putting yourself in college just does that. Um, it could be like a druid kind of thing. Like I said, you could draw it. I'm gonna say druid slash ranger, where you draw it from sort of the world around you. You draw it from the world around you. So I think whereas the druid and ranger draw that from nature, I think maybe the bard draws that from the people, the sapient creatures around them. In the same way that they sort of like leak out that magic of creation, that magic, that spark of life, and that's what they use and as the creation magic of their song. So I think that's very easy to do. So it's like, or we knock it all out into subclasses, archetypes of other classes, which I think would be my preferred way because I think bards are. I have very similar feelings in to bards in D&D that I have to monks in D&D, where I'm like, Shaolin monks don't make a ton of sense in D&D's inherent sort of Western, medieval, Renaissance-y kind of backdrop that's inherent to the game, that's sort of instinctual in the design. So it doesn't make too much sense. And the same way that bards, like a dude who sings real good and makes magic, also feels kind of weird and out of place. Maybe if the bards were focused more on specifically buffing and debuffing, which they do a lot of, don't get me wrong, they do a lot of, but I mean, like, not having spells that are like, I'm trying to think of a good spell off the top of my head. There's some of the basic cantrips that are just like, oh, and I just do straight damage. Like, I don't think that they should be a damage dealing class. I think they should focus more on buffing allies and debuffing enemies. And you'd want a bard to be in your party because they're better than anybody else, even potentially the cleric at doing that. And now the cleric might be better at doing something like hit point restoration, but the bard's better at doing things like maybe get some sort of bump to things like guidance or bless or bane and those sorts of things. Uh, which I think is very natural with like their bardic inspiration dice. Feel like yes, I want more stuff that feels like that for bard. Uh, but even bardic inspiration is kind of hard to play at the table. I see this a lot even in multiple actual plays where the player will just be like, "Oh, you have bardic inspiration," instead of being like, "This is the thing that I do to inspire you." There's not a lot of role play in that often, and I'd like to lean a little bit more towards the role play aspect of that, especially for a bard. So yeah, I think the classes are pretty easy to kind of move out. I think sorcerer just makes sense. They're just a full move from charisma to constitution, being like, no, it is your body, your physical being slash soul that manifests this energy. Because it's something that's within you that you're drawing out. And warlock, I think, moves to wisdom just because it's so close to clerics. As I said, there's only a slight difference between making a compact, like a contract with an entity for power, and being like, oh, I worship this entity and they give me power on it, which is in itself a contract, being like, oh, I give you faith and worship and sacrifice, you give me power. And very similar to being like, oh, the warlock being like, I'm going to do something for you, or I've made some sort of deal, a bargain to give you something, and in return I get this power. Or as a servant of yours to impart your will upon this world, in this plane of existence, very much does that. So they're very similar. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. So I think it makes sense for a warlock to be in the wisdom category. So, spell casting. So we do have some things that are just charisma-based spells. Of course, that's all we know. We talked about it earlier. Lots of examples of being fluid with the ability score of spellcasting. We'll see ancestry traits, or we'll say ancestry features, sidekicks, etc. So yeah, we don't really need to do any more than that because we know that anything that's we already talked about it with spell saving throws already, and anything that's a attack that are already we have so many. Let's say sidekicks, and of course with different spellcasting abilities, or let's say with different primary attributes using the same spell. They're casting the same spell. We talked about that. Well, okay, wizards are able to do what is probably, I don't know what this is off the top of my head. I'm sure I can find the answer to this with a quick search online. There we go. So I wanted to know, hey, what spells are kind of the most known by different classes in D&D? And one of those is Cure Wounds, which is it's available to clerics, druids, bards, paladins, rangers, and depending on some other things, like if you I think there's a wizard subclass that gives you the ability to get into some cleric spells, or if you take Magic Initiate, you get access to it. Actually, Magic Initiate is just a really good example. But all right, so clerics, wisdom, druid, wisdom, bards, paladins, charisma, rangers, wisdom. So wisdom, charisma, and artificer. Artificer's not in here too. Artificers get access through intelligence, cast per intelligence. So, yeah, artificers get cure wounds, right? Or maybe it's just healing word. Either way, we have these examples of already the same spells being cast across different classes who use different primary ability scores for casting magic. As well as Magic Initiate, which is the thing that I was going to look up real quick. You learn 2 cantrips of your choice from the cleric, druid, or wizard spell list: intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, so you already get to choose when you do the feat. So we have all these examples of being like, oh, well, you can use different, let's put that, ancestry feature sidekicks, feats, and multiple classes with different primary actions casting the same spell. So we already have a whole lot of, we already have a litany of ways in which we use different primary ability scores to get the same effect. So I think with spellcasting, that's a non-starter as to why we can't use something else. No problems. It gives us a very wide amount of fluidity, where we have physical attributes, which are our strength, con, dex, and our mental attributes, which of course are wit and chop. So being where the things are often very fluid as to how they move back and forth. Sometimes you get things where like, oh, it's a Constitution saving throw, and you're like, yeah, but it could be a Strength saving throw, right? Dexterity is really the one standout where it's like, no, this would have to be a dex. Just getting out of the way is dodging. In the very same way that sometimes there are lot of mental effects that would be like, yeah, that's very clearly wisdom. Like this is just your ability to perceive things or to be insightful about what's going on. Makes a lot more sense for as a standout save. So yeah, I think this kind of shows that removing charisma out of the game actually is not that difficult. The biggest hurdle I think is this guy right here. It's getting rid of the bard. Because like I said, you could switch them over to something else where you can make them into a wizard and make them intelligence based. You can move them into the sorcerer lane and make them con based. You could even do this as maybe different flavors, and that's how you do it with subclasses. Yeah, I don't know. Or you can move them over into druid and ranger, where it's the world around them, where they draw energy from. Especially if you want to lean into the words of creation, maybe they draw whatever that element is out of the world itself. Or like I said, I was thinking more. I like more of the sort of Goku Spirit Bomb thing, where it's like, oh no, I pull this from all the people, the dedication, the Tinkerbell clap, sort of situation, where it's like, oh, you have to believe, and that sort of draws it in. So they source their power from the people, and by picking up that latent energy of people and siphoning it into themselves, they're able to turn that into magic, or just using it as their inherent talent, which I think is very reasonable for them to be sorcerers. Like there's the old oh gosh, what is that guy's name? Uh, Robert Johnson. There we go. Famous blues musician. There's a movie called Crossroads, which is a story where it talks about so Robert Leroy Johnson. The idea was that he was a blues guitarist. He was not a particularly good blues guitarist. Then he kind of went away for a little bit. Then he came back and he was an amazingly good guitarist. And there's this myth portrayed in the movie Crossroads, but it was a myth before that, is that he sold his soul to the devil for the ability to play guitar really well. And the legend kind of comes from his rapid mastery of the guitar. And there is the Devil at the Crossroads song, so that doesn't help either. So, but yeah, this idea that like you could lean into maybe a warlock thing if you wanted to do that, but that feels like I would make that as more of a warlock build. I want to lean into the performance aspect of that rather than a bard who has a patron. I can see you go either way with it, but I think I would play it more likely to play it as a warlock who has a who plays who performs rather than the other way around. Rather than having a bard with a patron. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for this one. So I think that we did a pretty good job. I think there's only a few hurdles that we have to get through in the saves, and I think most of those fall pretty easily. Generally, intelligence, wisdom, or con. If you wanted to, like we said, we could say that something like banishment, something that physically moves your physical body. I think there is an argument to be made that that is a Constitution saving throw, which I think could be actually a very fun twist on something like banishment, which is often used against things like barbarians and fighters and your other melee combatants who generally don't have very strong mental ability scores. But if you flip it around and be like, no, actually, if it's a con save, those are the people who are more likely to actually, that are more rooted firmly to the ground with their body. Like their hold in this plane is stronger. And it's actually people like wizards who are less likely to make the saves, so they have to be careful about banishment. Which I think could help to maybe making that differentiation and moving things a little bit more into con saving throws, even though there are quite a few con saving throws. It is the third most popular saving throw. So there is dexterity, wisdom, and then constitution. But I think having a few more that are in con that aren't just like poison effects, which are most of them, poison or paralytic effects, paralyzed, things of that nature, stun sometimes. Uh, so if we moved it back into con, that does mean that it's going to be really, really hard to, as a player character, banish monsters, though, which is one thing we want to avoid. So I can see you going either way. I think I'd have to really sit down and crunch the numbers about how many monsters are prepossessed to Constitution versus Intelligence, and how many player. And the truth is that being banished as a player character is not very fun, because you basically get to sit out the fight until you come back. But it is a Constitution saving throw, which means it's likely that you're going to come back probably in a round, especially if it's like a big boss monster fight, like a solo monster. Like that monster's going to get hit multiple times. They're going to have to make multiple con saves. The more saves you have to make, the more likely it is you're going to fail, because you only have to fail the one time. You have to succeed every time. So more saves equal more opportunities for failure, means it's more likely you're going to come back. So yeah, just kind of depends. But yeah, I think we did a pretty good job. I think this was even easier than I thought it was going to be. I thought we really had to work at this a little bit, but actually, the ability score, which is the social RP aspect, I think we have the bare bones here, and I think this could work extremely well, and I think would be a much more fulfilling way to do social RP than what we currently have, which is you let the bard talk to everybody and nobody else does anything for 5 to 15 minutes, while the bard talks circles around one character and rolls a 35 persuasion check, and you're like, yeah, I guess you convince him. I don't know why I'm calling for rolls. I know you're gonna beat any roll that I give you, except on very rare circumstances. So I like having this ability to wrap it in and let everybody have an opportunity to be that, and then only relying on getting the little bump that kind of comes from being trained in either deception, persuasion, or intimidation. So I think this would work out really well. I think that works all super simply. I think the saves are pretty easy to get, because it's already such a small list that we have to change anyways. I think there's like a dozen spells, and only a handful of monster abilities that target charisma that you need to change. Umber Hulk's one of them. The Ghost Possession's one. There are probably a few others I don't know off the top of my head. Those are the two big ones. That are very easy to move over. Like, I could very much see the Ghost Possession being a con thing. I could see it being a wisdom thing, but I could also see it being a con thing. Being like, no, if I want to talk about it, it could actually be a strength thing. When you have, like, I'm thinking about, like, first of all, I'm thinking about Evil Dead, where Bruce Campbell's character, Ash, gets his hand possessed, just the one hand who's trying to kill him, and he ends up cutting it off. I guess it's the spoiler. The dude has a chainsaw hand. I don't know what to tell you. It's not really a spoiler. Anyways, he saws off one of his hands because it becomes possessed. Before the possession can kind of go through his whole body. But I'm like, there is this aspect of being like, no, I'm literally fighting for command of my own body over my own muscles, which I could see as being a strength saving throw, which we have almost no strength saving throws as far as when it comes to, especially things like spells. So I think we can knock this out. But yeah, I think this was actually way easier than I thought it was going to be. Just moving everything in Sorcerer over to Constitution base instead of Charisma base, I think makes plenty of sense. I think moving the Warlock over to Wisdom, so it falls more in line with the Clerics and Paladins, which it already kind of does, already makes sense. And then just having to determine what you want to do. If you want to do the same thing with Bard, where you move it into an Intelligence base, do you want to move it into the Sorcerer so it becomes con based? Do you want to move it into the Druid or Ranger where it's Wisdom based? Which I would probably not do. Certainly we don't need another Wisdom caster. We could use another Intelligence-based class, to be honest. That would mean that somebody might actually play another Intelligence-based class, because right now we only have one and a half if you count Artificer, which often I don't, because Artificer's got a bunch of stuff going on, other than just casting spells. But I think if I was going to really remake this, I would just take the existing Bard archetypes like the bard main pillar and its subclasses, and figure out how to divide those up into subclasses of other things, like trying to make them into a fighter subclass. Maybe make them, if you want to do like your sort of sneaky, cunning kind of bard who does a lot of deception, like a charlatan kind of style. Maybe you roll that in up under rogue, which makes a lot of sense. If you want to focus in on more the magic castery and the study and knowledge aspect, you roll it up under wizard. Again, if you want to go really the talent base, or if you want to go into that, we wanted to do with the crossroads kind of thing, talking about the Robert Johnson situation, you move them up under warlock as a perfect subclass and be like, no, you sold your soul to play guitar real good, or for some other sort of talent, and now you deal with that. So yeah, I think it's very easy. We already have a lot of precedence for fluidity and spellcasting, so that's moving that stuff's really easy. I don't think nobody's going to give us a lot of umbrage at that. I think people are going to be like, yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. But yeah, that's our notes to review, and surprisingly easy. And this is clearly not in the right. It should be. Surprisingly easy to do. I think the bard is the biggest sticking point. Or really most amount of work if going the subclass route. Otherwise, I think it's really easy. So yeah, tell me your thoughts about this. Think if maybe you could do that. I'm really not as concerned about this other stuff, but even if I was going to play a campaign when we were, or I wasn't like, I'm not going to put in the work to get rid of charisma fully. If I just did this part down here, just allowing this based off of what I already do, which is allowing mixing ability scores and proficiencies for skills and tools. If I just did this part and started pushing this more into my social encounters, and then really working with my players on getting them into everybody takes part in these social encounters, and you can use these other ability scores, and this is sort of what they represent in the way that you present yourself, and you can do that. Now there's going to be some weird like against type things, like if you wanted to play the strong and silent type, like how do you do something like a strength persuasion check if you're like, oh, but my character's not real good at talking. I don't want them to be good at talking, but I want them to be able to like still be have that presence, have them like fill up the room, like attention is drawn on them, but they don't have to say words to get what they want or to get their point across. Like, okay, so yeah, what you're gonna do is I think we're gonna get what I do. This might be one of the things where I'm gonna do that. What's the name of the stupid thing? Is it Blue Steel? Yeah. That's an old reference now from the old Zoolander movie. Blue Steel, which is kind of like you just give them the look. So maybe we'll do this. We'll do the Eastwood. We'll do the Eastwood squint. That's a little bit more iconic. The Eastwood squint. So if you've ever seen that, any spaghetti western that's got Clint Eastwood in it, or even American westerns that have Clint Eastwood in it, or Dirty Harry, pretty much anything Clint Eastwood for the most part, for most of his, especially front half of his career, say that he does a lot of acting, which is just kind of like squinting and looking at stuff. So I could see that it's like, oh, I want to make a persuasion check or an intimidation check, but I don't want to like break a table or something like that, and be like, okay, yeah, you can give me a Constitution intimidation check, and be like, you give him the squint, you give him the rock eyebrow raise, that kind of thing. So trying to do that and give them these other things that they can play on, and they feel like they are engaged in the social aspect instead of just everybody sitting back and letting the one charisma-based character do all the charisma stuff. So, I think that's everything. Yeah, that's everything we need to talk about. Hopefully you guys like this. If you want to see more stuff like that, make sure and leave me a comment down below, and I'll take a look at it. Maybe that's something we'll look at going forward. But I thought this was an interesting thing that kind of came up to me over the past week when I was thinking about it and be like, oh, what would that look like? Because I feel like a lot of people struggle, including myself, struggle with how to work charisma into the game without it being either too. I think it's has sort of like a reverse normal curve. So instead of kind of like going towards the middle, it really kind of goes sort of a U-bend. It's either charisma is often really, really powerful, or it's really, really not powerful when they're used. And there's not a lot of middle room. So I think maybe changing things up could help to do that. Like I said, since charisma is so much of the, 50%, if not more, of the social pillar of play in addition to wisdom. It's like having the ability to bring some of those other ability scores in, which we really struggle to do in D&D sometimes. Could be really helpful. That's why I really want to focus in on this, and this is something that I might end up bringing to my table. This right here, kicking a lot of that charisma back to other ability scores. So yeah, I think this will be good. So give it a try. Maybe try this out in your game. Allow people to make non-charisma based checks to try to influence other people. It could be really helpful. But that's it for me. Hopefully you enjoyed this. We'll be back next time. Probably talking about something else. I don't know what that's going to be yet. I have to figure it out. I got a week to do it. So we'll see you then. But until then, have a good one. Bye-bye.